is it like, coming up in a career in the news? I mean, like, for somebody to make it all the way on to television seems like it's very difficult to do. And then to have your own environmental segment in probably the most environmentally conscious area of the country, like, that seems to me to be climbing a mountain, and you left it.
Yeah, I left it. I loved my career. Like, I actually really loved being a journalist. I think in a lot of ways now I'm trying to figure out what journalism looks like in 2020 with the new media that we have. And I'm just still in the process of that, because I don't think I ever really want to give up on that. I mean, I had a camera that I carried around with me as a little kid. I was like 5 or 6 when I started shooting videos, and I like used to force my brothers to be in productions, and I shot videos in my dad's operating room before that was a problem, and there was HIPAA violations and whatnot. And there was always just like asking questions. And I mean, I remember like my AP biology teacher in high school was sure I would fail, because all I did was like, I was, The Office or like The Real World before it was ever a thing. Like, I would shoot videos of my classmates and interview them in class before, like, there was reality TV or the Kardashians or anything. And so when I got a perfect score on my AP bio test, I think my teacher was just like, I just don't understand. Like, how this girl is like the weirdest. She carries a camera. She interviews all of her classmates. How did she ever know like cellular biology? But somehow I was able to get through that. And so I miss it. There's a lot about it that I miss. I think like trying to figure out like how to do like what you do, for instance, like having a podcast or doing YouTube and looking at how to present information in a different way to people is keeping me very curious and interested in going down that path. And I think I'll figure it out. I think it's just like right now, as I'm sure we'll talk about, like we're working on an Airstream, and we're going to move off grid. And so it's trying to figure out lifestyle at the same time that I'm figuring out career. And I'm sure those two will kind of blend together. But yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot. I mean, I've seen it change. I've seen like in 2008 when the recession hit, a lot changed in journalism because a lot of money was lost. And so staffs were laid off. And that's when I was told, I mean, I came into the industry in 2007. So it was almost immediately after. And I've never really worked in a TV newsroom that wasn't affected by the recession. That's when they started making reporters shoot and edit their own video, which meant that you were no longer like sitting in the passenger seat making phone calls. You now were driving the car. Now, if you think about that for a second, like a reporter, I mean, it's not like the prima donna thing. I'm just doing my makeup. Like, I'm trying to understand what I'm talking about by 4:00 in the afternoon. So if I'm driving the car, that's not helping me and my ability to understand. So little things like that happened in 2008 that started to trickle down into the quality of the journalism that you're able to consume. And that happened also like in newspapers. There were a lot of layoffs, doing more with less. And I'm sure that happened in industries across the board, not just news. The problem is, like, if you think about news, the collateral or like the currency in news is relationship. That's the way I always looked at it. Like, my number one tool in my toolbox was my credibility and the relationships that I had with my sources. And when you have people like, less time and fewer people, and also just like younger people who are willing to work for a lot less and do a lot more because they started to add more live programming. So you're doing 3 stories instead of 1. You are starting to cut away at the credibility and the relationships, because you think about the day when you used to turn on your TV news and you had a guy or a lady who was like in their early 60s reporting the news. Now, what do you typically see? Like maybe mid-20s. Now, everybody's got to learn and start somewhere. I was in my mid-20s when I got started too. But I got to tell you, like, I didn't know, I'm not going to be crude here, but I didn't know one thing from the next when I was 25 years old, trying to figure out politics, the environment, crime, whatever the issue was. I thought I knew everything, and I knew so little. And it took me 15 years really to get to the point where I was like, okay, hold up. Maybe there are other ways to think about this topic, or there are other options to explore here. Because the first thing about being just a wise person, but somebody who is good at journalism, is to know what you don't know. And you don't figure that out for years, because I think your first few years in whatever you're doing, you think you know everything. And it's a super easy thing. And then you get burned a few times and you're like, oh, okay. And you hope that happens somewhere where there's only like 4 people watching and not, 500,000.
Yeah, like you don't really, when you're young, you don't have a way to say, hey, that doesn't add up to a larger picture that I understand, because you don't know about all the other things that would be connected with somebody's answer that they've just
Right.
given you, that's so simple and it fits right into place, and so you just pick it up and use it. And when
Yeah.
you're a journalist, now you're picking up that story and using it, and somebody is getting an advantage or somebody's getting a disadvantage as a result of it. So it's a ton of
Sure.
pressure on a person that doesn't have experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something that happens in the journalism world, and this is really the only industry I've worked in other than I actually did do 3 years in seminary. That sounds like penitentiary. It was actually great. I loved going to seminary, but I have a Master of Divinity degree and I worked with heroin addicts for a little bit. But other than that, journalism, like this is TV news is all I've ever done. And I did start at Fox News Channel in New York. So I was a producer for for their morning show, Fox and Friends. And then I moved into being a reporter for local news. So I've seen it on both sides. But I think what's unfortunate in that industry, and like I said, I'm not totally sure, like you tell me what it was like for you and what you used to do. There's a lot of just like, we only hang out with each other. It's very insular. You know, we go to work and then we go drinking with each other after work. And then we go to football games together. And we don't necessarily know a lot of people who are different than us. And I will credit, well, I think it's probably partially because I grew up riding horses. And so I had a lot of eclectic friends at the barn. People think that like riding horses just means you're like a snooty show person. But my barn, like we had all kinds of people, like people that, you know, didn't have floors in their cars, like the Flintstone cars, you know, from somebody whose parents, you know, owned like a cable company, or, you know, so all across the board when it came to, you know, education and wealth and background and culture and that was so formative for me. So I was very interested in having all kinds of different friends. And I think, you know, my not hanging out in the newsroom or like going drinking after work was really imperative to my ability to understand the world around me, because if there was a farming story that came up, like chances were I knew a few farmers. Or if there was something else, you know, that came up, I knew a person who thought a different way about this other issue. Or like, you know, I didn't just know Democrats or I didn't just know Republicans. And so because I had relationships outside of work where I was empathizing with people, because I knew they weren't a terrible person just because they thought this, because I knew them. I knew that they were a nice person. We went to dinner. You know, they helped take care of my horse, whatever it was. I couldn't just box them into thinking that they were just ignorant or stupid or mean or racist or whatever else just because they had one particular opinion. So then if you translate that into being a journalist, because I had those relationships outside of work, when I was covering these particular issues, I also was able to sit back and have empathy and say, okay, like what is really going on here? If you have somebody who thinks this way and, you know, the loudest voices are saying it's because there are all these negative things, but maybe there's another reason. Maybe there's truth to whatever they're saying and I want to explore it. I already had the curiosity level there ready to go. And I think unfortunately in a lot of ways, like they're, especially younger journalists, like just aren't developing those relationships outside of work. And then you may not think that's the most important thing, but that's what I always tell young journalists when I teach. Like, what's the most important thing? It's not learning how to use a camera. It's not learning how to write grammatically. There's plenty of terrible grammar in news these days. The most important thing is that you as an individual have relationships outside of work with people who are different than you and the people that are around you, so that you can start building empathy for people who don't think exactly the way that you do. That way you're going to start growing your curiosity, and that's going to make you a great journalist. And the technical side of things you'll learn no matter what.